A father is supposed to stand beside his daughter on her wedding day. He is supposed to steady her hand, clear her path, and remind her she is loved. But Chloe's father chose someone else, feelings over her heart. Her mother chose convenience over loyalty, and her sister smiled from the center of a family that had always made Chloe feel invisible. But on the morning of the wedding, the empty place beside her did not stay empty for long. Someone far more powerful stepped forward, and everyone finally saw the daughter they had underestimated.
The power saw fell silent. My fingers traced the clean edge of the cedar planter box, a custom piece for a new client. It was a world away from the gift my sister Olivia had sent me last week. A half-dead orchid she'd declared a lost cause. My father's voice came through my phone. Tinny and distant Clara, you need to be more understanding. He sounded like he was calling from another planet. Olivia S. just stressed out with Marcus. And with your new design firm, taking off it's a difficult comparison. I can give you away if she's sitting there feeling like a failure. My wedding was in 3 days, 72 hours. And my own father was backing out. This wasn't to some sudden family emergency. This was a deliberate decision. He was picking my sister's fragile ego over my wedding. Your father has a point, my mother added, and I could practically hear the crystal glasses chiming in their pristine Chicago townhouse. Just have the officiant walk you. It's very progressive, very modern. It's really not that important. You retold your family is your foundation. That SLI. Sometimes they re the ones who give you the final push off the ledge. If you've ever been made to feel small so someone else could feel big, you know what to do. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Clara, and this is Final Notice, the story you've been asking for. I set down my tools. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask them why they'd tear down my wedding to protect a 30-year-old feelings. The girl who would have begged them a decade ago was gone. In her place stood a woman with a spine made of rebar. My mind flashed to a Noyes High School auditorium. I was 15, standing by a detailed landscape model that had just won the State S Urban Planning Award. A blue ribbon hung from the corner. And right next to my display, 2 empty chairs. My parents were a no-show. Olivia had a tennis match across town. So this wasn't a new kind of betrayal, just a deeper cut. Okay, I said, my voice eerily calm. I get it. I could almost hear the collective sigh of relief through the phone. Oh, good. You were always the sensible one, Clara. We'll come by for the ceremony, but then we have to leave. We need to help Olivia with her big anniversary party that night. See you Saturday, I said, and ended the call. Then I unlocked my phone. My finger hovered over a password-protected folder, one I'd been carefully curating for the last 6 months. The folder was titled simply, Leverage. I added the recording of their phone call and the file uploaded instantly. Outside, a harsh Chicago wind rattled the workshop windows. I was 29, owner of a landscape architecture firm my family dismissed as my little garden hobby. I was used to the cold. I learned how to build something that could survive it. I swiped over to my messages and found Leo Torres, the man I was about to marry. To my family, he was just an architectural historian with a worn corduroy jacket, a nobody next to Olivia S., high-flying developer husband. They had no idea who Leo really was. They never cared enough to ask. I sent him a short text. Dad is Nick walking me down the aisle. He said it would make Olivia feel bad. I put my phone on the workbench, expecting a string of angry texts, maybe a frantic call. 30 seconds passed. Then a single message appeared. Leo didn't send his condolences. He didn't text about how furious he was. His reply was simple. Don't worry, I have the perfect wedding present for them. To get why my dad would torpedo my wedding, you need to understand the one God my family prays to, and that God's name is Marcus. My brother-in-law, Marcus Vance, was a big-shot property developer, the kind who wears $1,000 sneakers to lunch and jingles his keys just so you see the luxury car logo. He bankrolled my parents' entire life. Their golf club dues, my mother's new car, every bit of it. In exchange, my parents, Richard and Helen, gave him their absolute, unwavering devotion. Marcus had them on a leash, and he set all the rules. 2 weeks before that call, we were at some sleek downtown steakhouse where the appetizers cost more than my weekly payroll. Leo and I were shoved into the side of the booth, drinking tap water while Marcus dominated the table, complaining about the service. "So, Leo," he said, his voice loud enough for the neighbouring tables to hear, "still digging around in dusty old buildings? When are you going to get a real career? A man your age should be building wealth, not a library." My father gave a nervous little laugh, desperate to stay in the good graces of the man funding his retirement. My hands balled into fists under the table. I was about to say something, but Leo placed a calm, steady hand on my thigh. He didn't look offended. He didn't even look annoyed. He simply looked at Marcus the way an engineer might study a crumbling facade. "Architecture has its own rewards," Leo said, his voice quiet but clear. "It teaches you how to spot a weak foundation." Marcus just scoffed. "Whatever. In the real world, we build the future. Look at my new riverfront project. We're re-putting up a massive new tech campus, state-of-the-art offices, luxury condos, everything. It's going to completely revitalize that whole industrial district." My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide with faked reverence. "That is just incredible, Marcus! You're such a visionary!" "I try, Helen," he said, wrapping an arm around my sister. "The only problem is one little land deal. We have the funding, we have the zoning, but the main access point has to go through an old, historic warehouse district next door. And the owner is some old fossil who won't sell." "A fossil?" my father asked, trying to sound like he was in on the joke. "Some old crackpot sitting on a gold mine," Marcus grumbled, gesturing with his steak knife. "He wants to sell us the easement. Want to even meet with us. He does to see the big picture. He says holding up billions in development for a nice view. My lawyers will find a way to take the land from him. You can't stop progress." Leo took a deliberate sip of his water. "Some people just value history more than a high-yield investment," he murmured, almost to himself. Marcus sneered, spoken like someone who never managed a real asset portfolio. "Real money changes the skyline, Leo." Olivia, tired of her husband being the centre of attention, tapped her wineglass. "Speaking of changing things and big news," she announced, her voice suddenly sharp and loud, "Marcus and I are hosting a huge anniversary gala. We have some very important investors flying in that we absolutely have to impress." My mother practically vibrated with excitement. "Olivia, that's wonderful! A party! When were you thinking of having it?" Olivia looked directly at me, a sharp, triumphant little smirk playing on her lips. "This Saturday, May 24th. I know it's terribly last minute, but it's the only time our investors are in town, so what could we do?" The table went completely still. May 24th, my wedding day. The save the dates went out 8 months ago. My parents said nothing. They wouldn't even meet my eyes. My father became intensely interested in his steak, while my mother immediately started spinning. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "that will certainly be a packed day. We can definitely make it to both events, I'm sure of it. Want we, Richard?" "Absolutely," my father mumbled far too quickly. A big day for the whole family. I just sat there, my blood turning to ice. This wasn't a mistake. This was a targeted strike. Olivia chose that date deliberately to make our parents choose, to remind everyone who held the power. She wanted to prove, publicly, that her party was more important than my wedding. It was a vicious power play designed to cut me down to size. When the miserable dinner was finally over, we walked out into the biting Chicago wind. We headed for the valet, where Marcus S.'s brand new, obnoxiously bright blue electric supercar was waiting, gleaming under the streetlights. Parked next to it was Leo S.'s simple, 5-year-old sedan. Marcus popped his doors, and the car made a series of loud, unnecessary whirring sounds. "Drive safe," he said, his voice dripping with superiority. "Wouldn't want that old clunker to give out on you." Leo walked calmly past the passenger's side of the supercar. He paused for a moment, and his gaze landed on Marcus' wrist, on the ridiculously oversized designer watch he'd been flashing all evening. He looked at the watch, then he looked Marcus right in the eyes. "Nice watch," Leo said. "Richard, am I right? The tourbillon skull?" "It's an incredible piece of microengineering." Marcus froze. The smug grin slid right off his face, replaced by a flicker of pure, undiluted panic. His hand stopped, hovering an inch from the car's handle. "It's a business asset," Marcus stammered, his voice suddenly thin. "An investment. A very bold one," Leo agreed, giving him a small, knowing smile. "You have a good night." We slipped into our car. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rear-view mirror. Marcus was still standing beside his fleshy car, not moving. He looked absolutely horrified that some quiet architectural historian had just identified the $500 fake on his wrist. I just leaned my head against the cold glass and watched the city blur past. I kept replaying the dinner, the look on my sister Olivia's face as my parents just caved. She's always been the hothouse flower, needing a constant stream of compliments and expensive parties to feel alive. She lives for shiny cars and a room full of people telling her how important she is. Without it, she'd simply wilt. As a landscape designer, I know that real strength grows slowly out of sight. I was putting down the kind of roots that can break through concrete. My family thought I'd just wither and die without their approval. They had no idea what was about to hit them. It was 2 days before my wedding, and my bakery smelled of vanilla and roasting almonds. I was at my workbench, piping delicate sugar flowers onto a tiered cake for a client. This was my sanctuary. In here, I was in charge. A recipe could be adjusted, a design could be perfected, something wonderful could be created. But beyond these flower-dusted walls, my life was falling apart. My phone buzzed on the steel counter. Sarah Evans. She managed the Waterside Manor, our dream venue for my wedding to Liam, in just 48 hours. Sarah was more than a vendor. She displayed my custom cakes in the Manor's bridal suite. I wiped the buttercream from my fingers and answered. "Chloe, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice strained and clipped. All her usual warmth was gone. "Your brother-in-law Daniel is standing in my office. He just transferred a shocking amount of money to our account. He wants to cancel your wedding and book out the entire estate for Saturday for a last-minute corporate event." My piping bag slipped from my hand. The audacity of it felt like a physical blow. This was more than just showing off with a bigger party. He was trying to erase our wedding from existence. "What did you tell him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I told him you have a signed contract," Sarah said. He just smiled and said every contract has a buyout clause. He paid the full cancellation penalty plus a $50,000 bonus to secure the venue for his investors. I told him it was unethical, but he said business is business. "Chloe, he's in the lobby right now, directing his own event planner. You have to do something. Don't you let them touch anything, Sarah. I am on my way." I threw down my phone and ripped off my apron. My spatula clattered against the counter. Daniel actually thought he could just wire some money and make my life's biggest moment vanish, that he could write a check to solve his jealousy. I grabbed my keys and burst outside, blinking in the grey Seattle drizzle. Just as I reached my van, a quiet dark blue sedan pulled into my reserved spot. The engine purred with restrained force. The driver's side door opened and Arthur Vance got out. Arthur was Liam's mentor, a retired shipping magnate who preferred fishing gear to $1,000 suits. He had sharp eyes that missed nothing. Arthur was known for crushing arrogant CEOs during board meetings like they were soda cans. "Get in the car," Arthur said. His voice was calm, but it was a command. I stopped in my tracks. "How did you know?" "Liam called me," he said, holding the passenger door open. "He handles the architecture. I handle the termites. And your brother-in-law is a termite. Get in, Chloe. We're getting coffee. You look like you need it." And it's time we drew a very clear line in the sand. I slid onto the worn leather seat. The inside of the car smelled like old money and sea air. Arthur pulled away, navigating the downtown Seattle traffic with the intense focus he probably gave to stock portfolios. We ended up at a quiet, old-school cafe overlooking the Sound, the kind with dark wood, strong coffee, and waiters who have been there for 30 years. Arthur requested a booth where we could see the door. He ordered 2 black coffees. I was too sick to my stomach to even think about food. "Your family sees your happiness as a threat," Arthur began, getting straight to it. "This isn't random, it's a power play. Your success scares them. Daniel uses his startup money to control your parents. Since you don't take his handouts, he has no leverage over you, and that makes him feel weak. I traced a circle in the condensation on my cup. I know. I just never imagined he would do something like this. Cancelling my wedding 2 days out, it's just plain cruel. It's desperation, Arthur corrected. Men with real confidence don't need to pull stunts. He's doing this because he knows his carefully constructed world is fragile. Before I could reply, Pierre, the bell over the door jingled. I looked up and my stomach dropped. It was my sister, Olivia, with our mother, Eleanor, in tow. They were both clutching shopping bags from a luxury department store. Olivia wore a ridiculously trendy jacket, her hair professionally blown out. She surveyed the room and her eyes locked onto our table. A slow, condescending smile spread across her face as she approached, pulling our mother along like an accessory. "Chloe, what a coincidence finding you here!" Olivia said loudly. Her eyes darted to Arthur, instantly assessing his simple wool coat and dismissing him. "We were just grabbing some last-minute gifts for our little corporate retreat. The guest list is just exploding." Daniel's investors have very high expectations. You know, she glanced at my untouched coffee with fake concern. "It's too bad your little wedding couldn't afford a real event planner. But I suppose a DIY approach is sweet, in a folksy, unsophisticated sort of way." My mom offered a weak, apologetic smile and looked at the floor. Before I could say a word, Arthur placed one hand, weathered from years on the sea, flat on the table. The small movement silenced the entire conversation. "You must be Olivia," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. "Liam has told me all about you." Olivia puffed up, adjusting her designer bag. "Oh, really? I hope it was all flattering." Arthur's smile was pure ice. "He did mention your husband runs a tech startup, a fascinating business. I sit on the board of a few banks in Seattle. We see a lot of startups that look just like Daniel's." Olivia's smug expression wavered slightly. "Like Daniel's?" "That's right," Arthur continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "The kind with a very high burn rate, the kind that relies on the next round of funding to make payroll. It's a delicate game. You miss one projection, one investor gets nervous, and the bank calls in the entire business loan. The Teslas get repossessed. The downtown office lease is terminated. The whole illusion just evaporates." The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow beneath the expensive foundation. She blinked rapidly, her gaze flicking from Arthur to me. "I don't know what you're talking about. Daniel's company is a massive success. He's launching a new app this weekend." "I'm sure he is," Arthur said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "But I read financial statements, not tech blogs. Enjoy your retreat, Olivia." I truly hope the gift bags live up to expectations. Olivia's mouth hung open, but no words came out. She shot a panicked look at our mom, grabbed her by the elbow, and practically fled the cafe. The bell jingled as they rushed out. I just stared at the empty space where they had stood, my heart hammering in my chest. I had never seen anyone dismantle my sister so quickly, so completely, and without even a hint of anger. "That," Arthur said, setting his mug down with a soft click, "is how you handle a bully. You never get loud. You don't fight them on their terms. You simply and calmly remind them how far they have to fall." I looked at Arthur, my eyes burning with a mix of awe and profound sorrow. My own family was trying to destroy me, and this man, my fiancé's mentor, was the only one in my corner. "You need to build a wall, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice losing its hard edge. "Because people like that will keep taking from you until there is nothing left to give." I looked down at my hands, still faintly smelling of sugar. "I know he says right. I know they're toxic, but part of me still pictured my father walking me down the aisle. I just want him to pick me, just this once." Arthur reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His grip was surprisingly strong. "We choose our own family, Chloe. Your father has a choice to make. If he chooses wrong, I promise you, you will have a family standing with you. You will not walk down that aisle alone." We drank the rest of our coffee in silence. Arthur drove me back to the bakery, the tires of his old sedan hissing on the wet pavement. I thanked him, feeling like he'd handed me a suit of armor. But as I got out and looked at my little shop, I froze. My father's dusty old work truck was parked right out front. He was standing by the door in his worn canvas jacket, just staring at my bakery's sign. He looked like any other contractor in Seattle, but I knew that look on his face, and right on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from him. The battle wasn't over. I walked toward the old sedan parked by my bakery's kitchen door. The man inside was Arthur Vance. Anyone else would see a retired old sailor, a face etched by sun and sea, a simple coat, worn leather shoes. But he was so much more than that. My parents met him once and dismissed him as some old guy who liked my scones. They had no idea that Arthur Vance still quietly controlled Seattle-S largest shipping terminal, the bank that financed it, and half the commercial real estate on the waterfront. He was a titan of industry who preferred talking about salmon runs over attending galas. We met 3 years ago. Arthur has a rare genetic disorder, and his doctors had told him a celebratory dessert was impossible. I spent a month pioneering a new recipe using almond flour and botanical sweeteners. It worked. He enjoyed his first real birthday cake in 40 years. My family belittles my bakery as a cute little hobby, but my skill earned me the fierce loyalty of one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest. "You look like you've seen a sea monster, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice deep and calm. "Just pre-wedding stress, Arthur. Nothing more." He never believed that for a moment. His sharp blue eyes cut right through my fake smile. "I came by for my usual Friday order," he said, gesturing to a box on the counter. "But I have a minute for tea if you need an ear." "You seem troubled." I made him a cup in my small office. We stood there in the warm, spice-scented air of my kitchen. For months I had swallowed my hurt, trying to be the dutiful daughter. But today's ambush, combined with his quiet kindness, finally cracked my resolve. The dam broke. I told him everything. I told him my dad wasn't walking me down the aisle. I laid out how they were planning a charity gala specifically to sabotage my wedding day. I explained how my own father was taking my brother-in-law's side, not mine. Marcus just stood there listening. No hollow platitudes. He just sipped his coffee, his jaw set. "This brother-in-law?" Marcus's voice was different, icy. "What's his name again?" "Leo," I choked out. "Leo Croft. He's a property developer. My parents sank millions into his company, so whatever Leo says goes." Marcus said nothing. He just set his cup down with a slow, deliberate click. A flicker of cold understanding crossed his face. He tilted his head, putting the pieces together. "Leo Croft," Marcus repeated. "The architect behind that obnoxious Pinnacle Tower project. He wants my plot on Block 7 for his grand expansion." I just stared, stunned that he even knew the name. "Yes," I said. "He was just complaining about some stubborn old tycoon blocking his company's entire future." A slow, chilling smile spread across Marcus Ayer's face. It was the kind of smile that meant a hurricane was brewing. He pulled out a thick money clip and dropped a bill on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, adjusting his tie. His eyes met mine, and they were pure steel. A father's job is to secure his daughter's future. If he won't do it, then someone else has to. He gave a single, sharp nod, grabbed his things, and walked to his car. I watched him drive away, and it suddenly clicked. Leo's stubborn old tycoon problem was about to get a whole lot worse. I was still reeling when my phone buzzed. It was a new text from my father. I opened it, a foolish part of me hoping for an apology. Instead, I found a message that spelled out his conditional love in black and white. He wrote about a sensitive opportunity. Leo's biggest investors needed prime seats at our reception. He suggested I should disinvite the Sterling family, my future in-laws, to create space. If I refused, he would pull his $50,000 venue contribution. "We need to be strategic about this," the text read. I read it again. My father wanted me to kick out my own future family, the most wonderful people I knew, for a bunch of hedge fund managers. And he was trying to blackmail me over money for a venue I'd already secured on my own. He truly thought this would work, just like it always did with my mother. He genuinely thought I would trade my self-respect for his pathetic check. I didn't get angry. I didn't send back some long, dramatic essay about his betrayal. What's the point in arguing with a man who thinks love has a price tag? So I just placed my thumbs on the screen and typed one single word, no, and I hit send. I didn't even check to see his reply. I walked straight to my desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out my company checkbook. With a perfectly steady hand, I wrote out his name, Robert Miller. In the amount box, I wrote 50,000, and on the memo line, I wrote venue contribution refund. I ripped the check from the book, folded it precisely, and slipped it into a plain white envelope. I wrote my father's office address, stuck a stamp on it, and put it in the outgoing mail tray. My father thought $50,000 gave him the right to control my wedding. He thought it bought him the power to insult the family I chose. By sending that money back, I was revoking his access to my life. I didn't need his transactional support for my marriage, and I sure as hell didn't need his blessing to stand with my new family. That envelope sitting on my desk was the last piece of a bridge I had just burned to the ground. And it felt incredible. I had finally drawn a line in the sand. I had actually said no, but I knew my family. For them, pushing back was just an invitation to push harder. My mother, Catherine, was supposed to come with me for my final gown fitting the next day. It was literally the only classic mother-daughter event we had planned. I stared at the envelope, a cold dread tightening in my gut. My father would receive my message in the morning. He would know I chose the Sterlings over Leo's business ambitions, and I was certain my mother's appearance at that fitting would be the next privilege he would revoke. The morning of my fitting was bright and sunny, the kind of beautiful Chicago day I usually cherished. But not today. Today it just felt mocking. I stood in my closet, staring at the text my mother had sent just 15 minutes before. "So sorry, sweetie," it read, "but your sister Sophie is having an absolute emergency." Apparently, the caterer for their gala had cancelled, and my mother had to race across town to fix it. You know how she gets. So, no, she couldn't make it. "You'll look beautiful no matter what," she added. "Send me lots of pictures." I stared at the screen until the words went blurry. My mom was ditching me for my 30-year-old sister's tantrum. Over a party designed to humiliate me, I didn't even bother to reply. I locked my phone, grabbed my keys, and drove to the bridal boutique in River North all alone. The salon was gorgeous, filled with ivory silk and soft, flattering light. The owner, a chic woman named Isabel, greeted me with a warm smile that somehow made the ache in my chest feel 10 times worse. I stepped into the gown, a silk charmeuse dress with intricate beading along the bodice. It was perfect. Isabel led me to the platform in front of the large 3-way mirror. "Where is your mother today?" she asked kindly as she adjusted the train. She was so excited to see the final look. "She had a last-minute family thing," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly even. In the mirror, I looked every bit the bride. But standing there by myself, the brave face I'd been wearing for weeks finally started to crack. I realized I was grieving for people who were still alive. I was mourning the parents I deserved, not the ones I actually had. The ones who always put my sister S's manufactured drama before my real, once-in-a-lifetime moments. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut, furious at myself for this moment of weakness. Just then, a little chime announced that someone had entered the shop. I heard the quiet, rhythmic click of heels approaching. "You look absolutely magnificent, Amelia," a familiar, calm voice said. I opened my eyes. Diana Sterling was standing in the doorway, wearing a timeless navy blue coat and holding 2 coffee cups. "Diana," I whispered, quickly wiping the tear from my face. "What are you doing here? Ethan mentioned your mother might have gotten held up," Diana said. Her tone was casual, but her observant eyes saw everything. "I just wrapped up a board meeting nearby and figured you might want a second opinion on the final alterations." She walked over, handed me a latte, and then stepped back to admire the dress. She didn't offer any pity or ask a single question about my mother. She just filled the empty space with her powerful, grounding presence. "That beadwork is exquisite," Diana said with an approving nod. "It's sophisticated and strong, just like you. Isabel, perhaps we could take in the waist just a fraction." It needs to be flawless. For the next hour, Diana was the mother I had always longed for. She gave her thoughts on veil options, we discussed jewelry, and she offered sincere, intelligent compliments. When Isabel returned with the final invoice, I reached for my bag, but Diana was quicker. She had already given Isabel her black Amex card. "Diana, no," I protested, my face flushing with embarrassment. "I can get that. You've done more than enough." Diana turned to me, her expression soft but her voice unwavering. "Put your wallet away, Amelia. It's taken care of." "But I can't let you pay for my dress," I insisted. "You didn't let me," Diana said simply while she signed the slip. "I chose to. You are marrying my son in 2 days. That makes you my daughter. And we Sterlings? We protect our own. Your mother made her choice today. Now I've made mine. Come on, let's go grab some lunch before the rehearsal." The rehearsal dinner was that night at a stunning restaurant overlooking Millennium Park. The atmosphere was exactly what Ethan and I wanted, elegant but relaxed and filled with happy conversation. The entire Sterling clan was there. His aunts, uncles, and cousins had flown in from all over the world to pack the private room. They were all brilliant surgeons, authors, venture capitalists, but they were also incredibly kind, making me feel like I was already part of the family. And yet, 4 empty seats at our head table felt like a giant gaping wound. My parents, my sister, and Leo were still nowhere to be seen. For an hour I smiled and made conversation, trying desperately to ignore the void on my side of the room. I kept checking the entrance, hoping my father would appear. The main course was served, but the doorway remained empty. I excused myself, needing a quick escape to the powder room. Hiding in a stall, I pulled out my phone just to check the time, but out of habit, my thumb swiped over to a local society blog. The top post was a photo from just 30 minutes ago. It was from the grand opening of Chicago's newest, most exclusive rooftop lounge. And the picture was clear massive seafood towers, rare steaks, and magnums of vintage champagne. Leo's investors were all seated around the table, and right there with them were my own parents, Robert and Catherine, laughing as they raised their glasses for a toast. So they weren't stuck in traffic. There was no emergency. They had made a conscious decision. They picked a schmoozing opportunity for Leo's business over their own daughter's rehearsal dinner. I just stared at the picture on my phone, the image searing itself into my memory, and the blogger's caption was the final twist of the knife. "Power players closing deals. Because the right family is everything." A cold, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. The very last shred of hope I had for my parents had just vanished. I screenshotted the post and immediately saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Receipts. It was getting dangerously full. I splashed water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back out. I wasn't hurt, just determined. Liam was waiting by the massive stone fireplace. He knew something was wrong the second he saw my face. He didn't even ask, just pulled me into a tight, silent hug. "They're not coming," I whispered into his chest. "They're at some dinner with Ethan's investors." Sophia posted a picture. Liam gently pushed me back, his warm eyes suddenly like ice. "Show me." I handed him my phone, already open to the screenshot. He stared at the picture, the fancy restaurant, my beaming parents, and that awful caption. A muscle in his jaw twitched. The laid-back, easygoing man I loved vanished. In his place stood the ruthless businessman who crushed his competition. He gave my phone back, took out his own, and said quietly, "Give me a minute." I watched him stride down a quiet hallway to a hotel's private offices, phone to his ear. I had to know, so I followed, ducking behind a corner. Liam's voice was low, but filled with undeniable authority. "Daniel, it S. Sterling. I need the Red Mountain file, Ethan's Aspen development." "Yes, that one." He listened for a moment. "I don't give a damn about his margins," Liam said, his voice cold as steel. "He's been underwater for 3 months. We gave him a pass because of Chloe. That's over." Another pause. "Call his loan," Liam commanded, "and trigger the breach of contract clause. Immediately. Start the foreclosure on his commercial property Monday morning." "Oh, and Daniel, make sure his primary lender sees exactly how bad his books are. Let's see how his investors feel when they find out his empire is a house of cards. He hung up, pocketed his phone, and turned, finding me in the shadows. He wasn't guilty in the slightest. He was a man defending his wife. He came over, wrapped an arm around my waist, and guided me back toward the warmth of the dining room and his family. "No more free passes," Liam whispered, kissing my forehead. "His little game is over come Monday. Now, let's go spend time with the family that showed up." The next morning, sunlight streamed into the bridal suite at the Aspen Botanical Gardens. The air was cool and smelled of pine, lavender, and the mountains. The entire suite was designed for tranquility. I sat in a plush armchair while the makeup artist put on the finishing touches. The woman in the mirror looked serene, composed, ready. My friend Olivia stood by the window, focused on a legal document on her tablet, her sapphire dress stunning against the rustic wood. The atmosphere was calm, the exact opposite of the chaos that usually followed my family. Then my phone buzzed on the vanity. The screen glowed. "A text from my mother, Elena." I picked it up. The text read, "Morning, honey. That breakfast with Ethan's partners went super late. We're on our way now. We'll just take seats in the back so we can duck out right after the I-dos. Sophia's charity gala is tonight, and the planners are a disaster. Don't want to be in the way, so thrilled for you." I read it again. A year ago, those words have shattered me. I would have been texting back, pleading for them to stay, promising anything just to get their approval for once. But now, the words were just empty. They had no power over me. It was just confirmation of what I'd spent my whole life refusing to see. My mother was treating my wedding like an errand to run before her real day started. Sitting in the back wasn't for convenience, it was a message about my place in their lives. I set the phone down. No tears. I didn't even reply. Instead, I opened my banking app, scrolling past the accounts for my successful floral business, and tapped into my personal checking. I tapped on pending transactions, and there it was, check number 305 for $500 to Marcus Ramirez. He'd threatened to withhold even that paltry sum unless I kicked Liam's parents off the guest list for Ethan's partners. I hit stop payment. A box popped up asking for a reason. I typed 4 simple words. Services no longer required. I hit confirm. A green check mark appeared. The financial leash was broken. It wasn't much money, but the freedom felt enormous. I was done playing their transactional games of love. I locked my phone and slipped it into my clutch. From the Suite S second-floor window, I could see the main parking lot perfectly. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel as Ethan S. black G-Wagon swung into a reserved spot, kicking up dust. My father stepped out, fiddling with his tie and sneering at the venue. My mother followed, holding her skirt away from the ground like it was toxic. Sophia got out last, wearing a long, beaded, champagne-coloured gown far too close to bridal white, a classic, desperate move to be the centre of attention. Ethan locked the car, its chirp echoing in the morning quiet. Just as my family headed for the gates, a convoy of black Suburbans rolled in, moving with silent military precision. These were not taxis. They had government plates and radiated pure power. Men and women in sharp, expensive suits began to emerge. I recognized faces from Forbes magazine and the Wall Street Journal. There was a tech titan famous for hostile takeovers and the head of a major New York private equity firm. I even spotted several of Olivia's high-powered lawyer friends from Chicago. My father froze, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Then he puffed up his chest, turning to my mother with a smug, arrogant smirk. "Look at that, Elena!" Marcus's voice carried on the air. "Ethan's people. He must have invited them to prove what a player he is. He's perfect for Sophia, bringing this kind of muscle to a little garden party." My mother nodded excitedly, clinging to my father's arm. They walked through the gates, radiating a completely delusional pride, certain these titans of industry were there for a broke real estate developer. They had absolutely no idea these power players were here for Liam, the man they dismissed as a simple mountain guide. The heavy suite door opened. Anna, my wedding planner, stepped in with a clipboard. "It's time, Chloe?" she said with a warm smile. Olivia came over to adjust the lace on my gown, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze before heading down to her front row seat. I gathered my silk dress, stepped out, and started down the grand wooden staircase. Below me, a string quartet started to play, their soft music floating through the gardens. I reached the massive doors of the main hall. They remained shut, the last wall between me and 150 guests. I stood alone, clutching my bouquet of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus. My father was absent. No one was there to walk me down the aisle, to offer some last-minute wisdom, just the faint rustle of my dress on the stone. I closed my eyes, breathed in the cool aspen air, and steeled myself. I was about to face the void my family had left, ready for the sympathetic stares as I made that long walk alone. Then a shadow fell across the stone beside me as someone blocked the morning sun. I turned, and the air left my lungs. The string quartet shifted to a powerful, haunting melody. The music swelled, drifting over the manicured lawns and filling the crisp mountain air. From behind the doors it sounded both beautiful and ominous. That was my cue. I gripped my bouquet so tight the stems felt icy and wet. My heart hammered. For 2 days I'd been telling myself I didn't care, that their approval meant nothing. But standing there seconds from the aisle, the loneliness almost broke me. I was braced for the walk alone, for all those pitying stares, and then the shadow moved. The scent of rich cologne and leather cut through the fragrance of the gardenias. I turned, and my heart seized. It was Arthur Vance. He wasn't wearing his typical rugged blazer and boots. The real estate magnate stood there in a bespoke charcoal suit that looked like it was made for him. He radiated a quiet, absolute authority that demanded its respect without a word. He was 70, but he stood straight and solid as an oak. "Arthur," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He turned, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "I told you, Chloe, a father's job is to clear a path." He paused, "And if yours won't, it would be my honour." He offered me his arm. The simple gesture instantly centered me. My panic vanished, replaced by a profound wave of gratitude as I took it, feeling the strength of the mentor who'd stepped up when my family stepped away. "Ready to show them what real strength looks like?" Arthur asked, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. I nodded, a genuine smile finally touching my eyes. "I'm ready." The huge wooden doors swung open and afternoon sun flooded in, blinding me for a moment. Then everything came into focus. The garden was spectacular. White chairs lined a perfect lawn, filled with buzzing guests, and at the end of the aisle, under an arch of white roses, stood Liam. He looked magnificent in his suit, his eyes finding mine, full of promise. We took the first step forward. You could feel the air in the room change instantly. That polite murmur from the crowd just died. It wasn't one person whispering, it was like a wave of shock rolling through the guests. I glanced at the back row. My father, Hector, was sitting there, arms folded, his body rigid with fury. He'd picked a seat by the door, a smirk on his face, waiting to watch me walk down that aisle alone. He wanted everyone to see his victory, but instead, Hector was watching me on the arm of Harrison Caldwell. I saw the precise moment my father recognized him. His smug look completely evaporated, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He literally recoiled in his chair, trying to disappear into the scenery. The man he'd written off as some washed-up old relic was the most influential developer in the state, and he was escorting the daughter Hector had cut off. Next to him, my mother, Maria, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked between me, Harrison, and my sister, Isabella, who was frozen in her expensive dress, her mouth hanging wide open, but Preston S.'s reaction was the best. Preston, the smug developer who tried to get our wedding cancelled. Preston, who mocked my fiancé and flaunted his family's influence. Preston, whose massive new development was now stalled, waiting for a stubborn old relic to sign off on a crucial land sale. His jaw actually dropped. His knuckles were white from gripping his chair. His eyes darted from Harrison S.'s face to mine as the awful reality finally sank in. The relic he'd belittled, the man his lawyers couldn't bully, was walking his future sister-in-law down the aisle. In a few seconds, my family's whole world just crumbled. Their social status, Their entire carefully crafted image of superiority was being dismantled by the man standing next to me. Harrison leaned close, his voice a low, amused rumble meant only for me. "Your brother-in-law looks like he is trying to swallow a hornet," he murmured. "I imagine he's re-evaluating his entire approach to that land deal right about now." A real, joyful laugh escaped me. Not some polite little bridal chuckle, but a full, happy sound that lit up my whole face. A camera flashed, freezing the moment, a bride absolutely beaming next to an industry titan. We got to the altar. The music swelled perfectly, then softened. Harrison turned to Liam. The two men simply looked at one another. There was no posturing, no alpha males, stare down. Just a quiet mutual respect between two men who understood the worth of the woman between them. Harrison offered his hand. Liam shook it firmly. "You take care of her, Liam," Harrison said, his voice loud enough for the first few rows. "She's one of a kind." "I will, sir," Liam replied, his gaze finding mine. "Always?" Harrison then stepped away and took his place in the front row in the seat reserved for the father of the bride. A silent, powerful guardian. I turned to Liam and he took my hands in his. His warm, solid grip was all the anchor I needed. The officiant started talking about love and forever, but everything else just melted away. I didn't glance back at the last row. I didn't have to see my parents to know they were there, reeling from how badly they'd messed up. Their entire life was a performance, and the audience was finally walking out. We spoke our vows under that wide-open Colorado sky. The words felt heavier, truer, because of what we fought through. When Liam put the gold band on my finger, it felt cool and certain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said with a smile. "You may kiss the bride." Liam leaned in, and his kiss was tender, strong, and deeply comforting. The crowd erupted in cheers. We turned, our hands joined, and started back up the aisle as the new Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. Passing that last row, I kept my eyes fixed ahead on the sun-drenched gardens. I didn't give Hector, Maria, Isabella, or Preston even a flicker of a glance. They were no longer the main characters of my life. They were just spectators in the cheap seats, watching a future they had thrown away. The wedding ceremony was flawless, but as everyone moved toward the cocktail reception, the real fireworks were just about to begin. My family had planned on making a quick, dignified exit. They were about to find out that leaving wasn't on the agenda, and that the bill for their arrogance had just come due. The reception was in a massive tent on the lawn, glowing under hundreds of lanterns. Round tables draped in white surrounded a dance floor, and that seating chart wasn't random, it was a statement. My parents, Isabella and Preston, found their names at table 19. It was pushed into the farthest, darkest corner of the tent, right beside the swinging doors to the kitchen. Every time a waiter charged through with a tray, the door would swing open, narrowly missing the back of Hector's head. All my life, my family had made me feel like an outsider. Now it was their turn. I sat at the head table with Liam, his family, the mayor, and Harrison Caldwell. From my seat, I could watch the Hayes family trying to pretend they weren't humiliated. My mother nervously pushed food around her plate. Isabella sat rigid, ignoring her wine, her couture dress invisible in the gloom. But Preston was practically vibrating with anxiety. His new real estate project was bringing the money. His investors were getting nervous, and the only man who could bail him out was sitting 50 feet away. Preston watched Harrison Caldwell get up and head to the elegant mahogany bar. To a man drowning in debt, a billionaire ordering a drink looks like a life raft. Preston smoothed his tie, abandoned his wife, and started weaving through the tables. He approached the bar with a huge plastic smile, faking the easy confidence of a man who belonged. He ordered a bourbon, sliding up next to Harrison. "Preston Hayes. My wife is Isabella. I'm Chloe's brother-in-law. I was hoping for a word about that commercial property on the west side. We have a proposal that I think could be mutually very profitable." Harrison didn't even look at his outstretched hand. He just stared at Preston like he was something you'd wipe off your shoe. Before Harrison could speak, a glass clinked quietly on the bar. Maya Thorne had appeared between them without a sound. She wore a sleek emerald dress that looked like armor. "Mr. Caldwell won't be discussing business tonight, Preston," Maya said, her voice smooth as silk. "He has enough to worry about with his current liabilities." Preston's smile faltered and he lowered his hand. "I'm sorry, but this is a private conversation." Maya faced him, her expression pleasant, patient, and utterly lethal. "We've met before, Preston, at the coffee shop. My name is Maya Thorne. What I didn't mention then was my job title. I'm the Chief Legal Counsel for Thorne Enterprises." Preston just blinked, the name not clicking for a moment. Then you could see it, the blood drained from his face. Thorne Enterprises was the firm holding the mountain of bad loans on his entire Bozeman development. They owned him. "We hold your debt, Preston, every last dime, and as of yesterday, you are officially in breach of your loan covenants." Preston swallowed, his face tight with panic. "Your firm, you work for the parent company?" "I do a bit more than work for them," Maya corrected him gently. "It's the family business. My brother is the CEO. Preston's eyes widened in absolute horror. He whipped his head around, scanning the tent, and saw him. At the head table, Liam was laughing with some of my old friends from college. The man Preston had dismissed as a broke mountain guide was the CEO who held his entire financial future in his hands. Liam wasn't a guide. He managed the trust that owned the very mountain this resort was built on. "Foreclosure proceedings begin Monday," Maya informed him. "I suggest you enjoy the open bar while you can." Preston stumbled backward, crashing into a server and rattling a tray of champagne flutes. Maya simply took a sip of her water and walked back to her table, leaving him gasping for air next to an ice sculpture. A sharp clinking sound cut through the noise as a spoon tapped a glass. The talking stopped. Harrison was at the main table, holding a microphone. The whole room went quiet, waiting for the Titan to speak. "Weddings are about beginnings," Harrison started, his voice commanding the huge space. "Most of you look at Chloe and see a lovely bride. I see the single most innovative scientific mind in this state." He let that sink in. He wasn't being charming. He was stating a corporate fact. "For the last 6 months, Chloe and I have been bound by a very strict non-disclosure agreement," Harrison went on. "Tonight that agreement expires. My company, Caldwell Hospitality, spent 2 years searching for a signature botanical formula for our luxury spas all over the world. We tested labs from Paris to Tokyo. The only one that made the cut was developed in a small greenhouse right here in Bozeman." I risked a look at my parents' table. Hector was leaning forward, his face a perfect picture of utter confusion. "6 months ago," Harrison announced, his voice booming, "Chloe signed a $5 million exclusive contract with my company. She did this on her own. She is not just an innovator, she is a self-made force in her field. So, please, join me in raising your glasses to Mrs. Thorne." The entire tent just exploded with applause. 150 people were on their feet, cheering for me. That sound was like a tidal wave of acceptance, washing away years of being made to feel small. Through the ovation, I caught my father's eye. Hector Ramirez was still sitting down. The truth was finally hitting him, and you could just watch his whole world fall apart. The daughter he'd called a lost cause, the one he wouldn't walk down the aisle, was now a multi-millionaire, earning the respect of the one man he truly feared. He'd wagered his family's future on a leased Porsche, ignoring a real diamond for a shard of glass. Sophie couldn't take it. The applause felt like 1,000 tiny needles. She shot up, her chair screeching on the floor. She snatched her purse, stormed for the door, and yanked Grant's arm, dragging her stunned fiancé out into the cold night air. That Monday, I was packing for our honeymoon in the Maldives. Our new house smelled of coffee and the promise of rain. My husband, Leo, was at the island, checking emails before we left for the airport. We were just soaking in the quiet of our new life, completely unaware that a Category 5 disaster was tearing my family apart on the other side of town. I had to piece it all together later, from court filings and town gossip. At 8 in the morning, Grant showed up at his office. His head was throbbing after a weekend of pure humiliation. He collapsed in his chair, desperate for a way out. A cream-coloured envelope was waiting on his keyboard. The return address was Sterling Development. Grant tore it open, expecting a fight over invoices. Inside was a single page. It was a final, unconditional termination of his partnership agreement. The legal language was brutal. The board cited a total lack of integrity and questionable business ethics as the reason for cutting all ties, effective immediately. His entire real estate venture was gone. Before the letter even hit his desk, his inbox pinged. It was an email from his bank's legal department. It was a notice of default. The massive loans propping up his entire operation were being called in. All of them. He had 30 days to come up with millions of dollars that he didn't have. His glass office suddenly felt like a fishbowl on display. Across town, my sister Sophie was in her own fantasy world, fighting her own petty battle at an event planner-esque boutique. She was trying to erase her bruised ego by planning a party that would make my wedding look small. She approved a wall of imported roses and a 5-tier champagne fountain. The planner slid the final quote across the table. A huge deposit was due immediately to book it all. Sophie pulled out her platinum card with a smooth, well-practiced motion. The event planner swiped it, declined. Sophie laughed it off, pretending it was just a technical glitch. She handed over another card, declined again. Her smile felt like it was glued on. She reached into her handbag for Grant's main corporate card. The planner ran it through the machine. The little screen glowed with a single, harsh, red word. Confiscate. The planner slid the device back. She said her vendors required payment by noon, or every single booking would be cancelled. Sophie practically ran into the hallway, her hands trembling as she tried to call Grant. The call went straight to voicemail. In under an hour, the planner had called the caterer, the florist, and the venue. The extravagant party was officially off. In a small community like Silverwood, that kind of news travels faster than wildfire. Her social status had just evaporated. The final blow landed in a quiet house across town. Arthur and Eleanor sat in their living room, their afternoon tea forgotten. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock. Arthur's pride was wounded, but he was convinced Grant was a brilliant businessman who had just hit a little turbulence. He was certain Grant would recover and continue to fund their lifestyle. Just then, their landline rang. It was Sophie. Her voice was sharp and panicked as she rattled off the story about the frozen cards and the cancelled party. Arthur took on a calming, fatherly tone. He told her not to panic, promising he'd wire her cash from his and Eleanor's home equity line to solve it. He hung up, strode into his study, and pulled up his online bank account. He navigated to their property details, expecting to see decades of equity. He stopped cold. He just stared at the screen. The numbers were wrong. There was a huge negative balance on their house. A second mortgage had drained every cent. Arthur clicked into the loan details, his fingers starting to shake. The signature was dated on a Tuesday night, about 8 months back. He remembered that night perfectly. Grant had shown up with a leather briefcase and a very nice bottle of scotch. He'd spread out a mountain of paperwork, explaining he was creating a special trust just for them. Grant said it would automatically pay their country club fees, Eleanor's car payments, and their property taxes. He praised their financial sense, poured them another drink, and just pointed where to sign, rushing them to lock in the rate. They signed every page, no questions asked, placing all their faith in their golden boy son-in-law. The truth was burning on the monitor. Grant wasn't funding their life with his success. He had secretly put their house up as collateral for his own crumbling empire. The leased cars, the club dinners, the designer clothes they had been paying for it, all with debt on their own home. He was giving them an allowance from their own money to keep them happy and on his side against me. When Eleanor walked in, she saw her husband's face was ashen. Arthur just slowly turned the laptop to face her. The truth crashed down on them both. They had thrown away their own daughter for a con artist who was literally stealing their home out from under them. The arrangement they thought was a safety net was actually a trap door, and Grant had just pulled the lever. They had nothing left. Their savings were gone. Their reputation in town was destroyed, and their home was about to be repossessed. Arthur grabbed for his phone, his hand shaking so hard he could barely hold it. He knew only one person in the state with the kind of power to stop this catastrophe. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over my name, about to make the one call that would ignite an even bigger fire. That Tuesday morning, the mountain light was casting long, beautiful shadows across our new hardwood floors. Leo and I were in our bedroom, packing for 2 weeks at a private villa in the Maldives. I was folding a dress, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in what felt like my entire life. The wedding was over. The drama was finished. And for the first time in my 29 years, I felt free from the suffocating weight of my family's judgment. Then my phone started vibrating on the nightstand. It was a hard, angry buzz that wouldn't stop. It sounded less like a call and more like an alarm. I put down the dress and went to see what it was. The screen was a waterfall of notifications. Dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages. Every single one of them was from my family. My father, Arthur, my mother, Eleanor, my sister, Sophie. I unlocked my phone and went straight to my voicemail. 5 new messages from my father in the last 30 minutes. I hit play on the first and put it on speaker. Clara, my father's voice was broken, completely drained of all its usual power. He sounded small, scared, and decades older than he had just yesterday. Clara, please, you have to answer. We're in serious trouble. Grant lied about everything. He took out a huge second mortgage on our house. The bank just sent the foreclosure notice. They're going to take our home. I just stood there, completely frozen, his words hanging in the silent room. He took a shaky breath. I know your husband's company. I know he's the CEO. He owns the debt. Please, Clara, you have to go to him and ask for more time. We are going to lose everything. We have nowhere to go. Please call me. The message ended. A second later, a text from my mother popped up. Clara, why didn't you tell us about this? We were so very proud of you, but we desperately need your help. Grant's business fell apart and we're ruined. Your father is having chest pains. You tell Leo to stop this foreclosure. We are your family. Family is supposed to help family. I had to read that text 3 times to believe it. No apology for walking out of my wedding. Not a single word of regret for choosing Sophie's fake engagement party over my real one. Nothing about the years of pain they had put me through. Instead, it was just the breathtaking arrogance of their demand. They had lit their own house on fire, and now they expected me to put it out. They assumed the daughter they had treated like a ghost for a decade would just call up her billionaire husband and have him fix it. They actually believed they still held that kind of power over me. They thought my love was a bank account they could just withdraw from now, that Grant's was empty. Then came a text from Sophie. Clara, Grant is falling apart. His partners are gone. You have to make Leo fix this. We're supposed to be family. You better not let this happen to me. She wasn't asking for my help. She was blaming me for her fiancé's spectacular failure. She was enraged that her fairy tale was turning into a nightmare, that she was no longer the perfect daughter with the perfect rich fiancé. And she genuinely expected me to rebuild the pedestal she'd just been knocked off of. Leo walked in just then, holding our passports. He stopped right in the doorway. He saw the tension in my shoulders, the glowing phone in my hand, and the ice in my eyes. Liam placed the passports on the nightstand and walked toward me. He didn't have to ask what was wrong. He already knew. The lawyers at his firm, Blackwood Capital, had called in the loans at 9 a.m. on the dot. The implosion was happening exactly as predicted. They're losing everything, Liam said softly, his tone a mix of calm observation and deep kindness. I know, I answered, my own voice surprisingly steady. David leveraged their house for his latest development. The bank just sent the foreclosure notice. And now they want a savior, Liam said, watching me closely. He was handing me the reins, letting me decide the fate of the family that had shattered my world. What's your move? Liam asked. I can make this all go away. I can even renegotiate the terms. It's up to you, Amelia. Whatever you need to be whole, I'll do it. My phone buzzed again. My parents were about to lose their home. My sister Olivia was about to face a public shaming. My own father, who skipped my wedding because it might upset her, was now pleading for a lifeline from the husband he'd once called a corporate shark. I remembered every missed recital, every holiday spent alone. I saw myself at the front of the church, my father's spot beside me empty. I met Liam S. gaze. Decades of shame vanished, leaving only a hard, diamond-like clarity. "Let it burn," I said. Liam nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture. He accepted my decision without question. He wasn't judging me. He understood that forgiveness requires repentance, and my family had never offered any. I pressed the power button on my phone until the screen asked me to power off. I swiped my finger across it, and it went black. The barrage of frantic texts and calls was silenced. I threw the phone into my travel tote and zipped it closed. The drive to O'Hare was peaceful, a bubble of shared silence. We boarded the flight, escaping the brutal Chicago winter. Flying toward Santorini, I watched the city I was leaving behind get smaller and smaller until it was gone. Back in Chicago, the Peterson family was trapped in a disaster of their own making. My father kept calling a phone that would never ring. My mother was weeping for a home that was already bank property. Olivia was likely in some cramped rental, looking at David, her husband, whose ambition was built on sand. They were searching for an exit, unaware that I had already used it and bolted it shut. Their emergency plan was gone, and the recoil had devastated them. While they picked through the ruins of their choices, Liam and I were jetting off to an island paradise to celebrate a hard-won peace. But the war wasn't over. You can leave your family behind, but you can't escape the drama. A locked door is only a temporary fix until you have to return and face what's waiting. And I knew they'd be waiting. The air in Santorini was warm, smelling of salt and olive groves a universe away from the biting Chicago winds. We had a private villa perched on the cliffs, with only the sound of the Aegean Sea below. No cell service, no internet. The quiet was absolute. For the first 2 days it was almost frightening. For my whole life I had been programmed for high alert, always bracing for the next family crisis, the next loyalty test designed to prove my worth. My go-to strategy was simple: surrender. I made myself smaller, more agreeable, hoping that if I demanded nothing, they might finally give me a place. Sitting on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky, I could still imagine my phone buzzing in my purse. The island was silent, but my thoughts were deafening. The guilt that comes from finally drawing a line is a heavy, smothering blanket. I kept seeing my father, the one who taught me to draw, getting the eviction letter. I pictured my mother boxing up 30 years of her life. I was safe in a beautiful villa with the man I loved, but the lifelong habit of trying to solve their problems was a current pulling me back out to sea. Then Liam came onto the terrace with 2 glasses of chilled white wine. He looked at ease in a loose shirt and linen trousers. The cutthroat financier who had just dismantled my brother-in-law's empire was gone, and in his place was the steady, gentle man I married. He put the wine glasses down and joined me. He didn't press me to talk or pretend to be happy. He just sat with me in the silence, his presence a solid, reassuring weight. "You're expecting the worst," Liam said gently, his eyes on the horizon. "I'm waiting for this awful feeling to go away," I confessed, my voice thin against the sound of the surf. "I can't stop thinking about that house, my childhood home. I know this is their fault. I know David is a con artist, but it's still my parents losing it all. And I could have prevented it, but I didn't." Liam turned to look at me. He didn't offer empty platitudes or say they deserved it. He gave me the truth. "Real peace isn't about running from your issues, Amelia," he said, his voice calm and strong. "It's about having boundaries that don't break. You've lived your whole life thinking their love was something you had to win. You thought you could earn it by absorbing their dysfunction. This feeling you have, it isn't guilt. It's grief. You're mourning the family you should have had, the one you never got." I looked down into my wine. He was right. This pain wasn't about a desire to save them. It was the devastating certainty that even if I saved them, it wouldn't fix anything. If I wrote the check and settled the debt, they wouldn't suddenly value me. They would never say sorry for leaving me alone on my wedding day. They'd just swap one crutch for another, replacing David's empty promises with my hard-earned money. Our relationship wouldn't be repaired. It would just be reset to the same broken pattern. They'll assume you're going to clean this up the second we land, Liam said, his eyes holding mine. They'll use your shared past as a weapon against the boundaries you just built. You need to choose, right now, who you are when that call comes. Are you the daughter still desperate for their validation, or are you the woman who designed her own life? The question settled between us in the warm, salty air. I glanced at my hands. They were an architect's hands, steady, creative, used to building things that last. I had built a successful design firm from the ground up. I had won the respect of a Wall Street titan with my own vision. I had a husband who saw every part of me and loved me for it. My whole life, I'd been drafting blueprints for my future while my family was trying to salvage a condemned building. I had survived my own collapse. I refused to feel guilty for my own success. I'm the woman who built a skyline, I said. The words felt strange, but speaking them aloud gave them weight. Liam gave me a genuine, warm smile that lit up his face. Yes, you are. Something inside me had shifted for good. Over the next week, the phantom phone vibrations stopped. The need to check for messages disappeared entirely. I swam in the sea and spent evenings with Liam, planning our new home in Wisconsin. I was finished taking responsibility for their decisions. I finally understood that you can't rescue people who are committed to sinking. Their decisions were their own, and so was the results. I wasn't that quiet little girl anymore, hoping for an invitation. I had designed my own foundation, and I decided what was built on it. On our final day, I found my phone at the bottom of my suitcase. It felt like a cold stone in my palm. I knew if I turned it on, my screen would light up with chaos, missed calls, furious messages, updates on David's spectacular failure. I didn't power it on. I just put it in my bag, keeping the screen black. I'd handle everything when we landed, on my own schedule. And just like that, we were in the air, heading back to the clear Wisconsin skies. I watched the blue Aegean Sea disappear below. I was going back a different person. The insecure girl who longed for her family's blessing was gone, left behind in Chicago. The woman on this plane was confident and knew her value, but as we flew north, a cold reality set in. It's simple to ignore the mess when you're a continent away. The real test of my new strength was waiting for me back home. My family was cornered, with nothing left to lose. A caged animal will claw at the bars before it gives up. I knew they wouldn't stop at calling. They were coming to declare war on my territory. The air in my new architecture studio was quiet, smelling of coffee and drafting paper. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after my honeymoon, and I was in my glass office reviewing the final blueprints for the Sovereign Group. Business was better than ever, thanks to the massive contract that had put my firm on the map. Liam was at a large oak table signing the closing documents for our lake house. Across from him sat Alex Vance, who was in town to finalize a major merger. Everything felt peaceful, controlled, and professional. That quiet was destroyed when the lobby doors flew open with a crash. I looked up from my screen as angry shouts filled the studio. My assistant, Sarah, was trying to calm them down, but they pushed right past her desk, ignoring all sense of decorum. It was the Peterson family. Richard burst in first, his face flushed, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and oversized. Eleanor was a step behind, a picture of raw fury mixed with fear. Chloe was next, clutching a brand-name coat and pulling a dazed-looking Marcus by the arm. They looked absolutely shattered, like a family who'd just watched their entire legacy go up in flames and were now cornering the one person they thought was their last hope. I didn't flinch. I didn't signal security. I just set my tablet down, smoothed the front of my blazer, and walked forward to greet them. Leo and Maya were instantly on their feet, standing on either side of me like a silent, formidable honor guard. "Ava!" Richard yelled, his voice cracking when he saw me. "Get this woman to move! We're your family!" "We don't need some stupid appointment." Actually, Richard, you do, I replied. My voice was calm, cutting through the low murmur of the event hall. You blew past security. You are officially trespassing. Trespassing? Eleanor shrieked, clutching her pearls like a soap opera star. We are your parents. This is an emergency, Ava. We've called for weeks. Why won't you answer your phone? Marcus finally wrenched his arm free from Chloe. He looked like he was about to be sick. The arrogant financier who'd once mocked Leo's quiet academic life was gone. In his place was a man on the verge of losing everything. He stumbled forward, his gaze jumping past me, landing with sheer terror on Leo. Leo, please! Marcus begged, his voice trembling. You have to call off the foreclosure, the development, the loan. It's all connected. If you call that loan, I'm finished. I'm family. You can't do this. Leo just looked at Marcus with the cold, detached gaze of a CEO evaluating a failed asset. He didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. I'm not family, Marcus, Leo said quietly. I'm the head of the firm that owns you. You sold out this family. You lied directly to my face. This is on you because you got caught, Richard, not because you feel 1 ounce of remorse. That's all he saw, just another investment that went bad. He looked at me, searching my face for a weakness that wasn't there anymore. How can you say family means nothing? Ava, come on. We have to work together. We can fix all of this if we just present a united front. He actually tried to take my hand. United, I thought, my voice low and sharp. Don't you dare lecture me about family just to get what you want. The audacity was breathtaking. He just stood there, a fallen king in the middle of his own wreckage. He pointed a shaking finger right at me. Avas, this has gone on long enough. You're acting like a spoiled child holding a grudge. You will tell your husband to stop this. You owe us. We gave you your start. You're not going to let us lose our home over some petty tantrum. He said it with such confidence, as if his parental authority still meant something. He actually thought he could command me and I'd obey. I looked at the 4 of them, a pathetic scene in my company's lobby. I didn't yell. The rage I'd carried for years was now cold and clear. I turned to Maya. The files, please. Maya opened her briefcase and handed me a tablet. Maya handed me the tablet with a quiet, knowing look. I powered it on. The screen lit up with perfect copies of files I'd pulled from their shared family cloud storage. I selected a single document and walked over to Richard. I didn't just hand it to him. I held it up right in front of his face, forcing him to see it. That is a screenshot of the text you sent me the night before my first big investor pitch, I said, my voice ringing in the now silent lobby. The one where you wrote, I can't make it. Your sister feels like you're showing off. You tried to torpedo my career to protect her fragile ego. That was betrayal. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open, utterly speechless. I swiped on the tablet to a bank record. I walked to Eleanor, who looked like she wished the floor would open up and swallow her, and I held it up. This is the wire transfer confirmation, I said, locking eyes with my mother's horrified expression, showing Marcus paying $10,000 to a city official to block my construction permit. He tried to kill my dream project so Chloe could build some tacky boutique on the same land. And you, Eleanor, you skipped my final board presentation to help her pick out chandeliers for it. Eleanor made a choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. I turned to Chloe. I swiped to a sharp, geotagged photo. I held the tablet so she could see her own grinning face staring back. This is the photo you posted the night of my big launch, I said, my voice dangerously level. The launch my entire family ditched. You were at the Sterling Hills Country Club, toasting Marcus's new fund with vintage champagne. Your caption read, celebrating with the only people who really matter. Chloe looked at the picture, her crocodile tears drying instantly as she realized I had proof of everything. I stepped back, standing with Leo and Maya. I looked at the desperate people who called themselves my family. You came here talking about family loyalty, Richard, I said, my voice ringing with finality. But loyalty is something you earn. You gave all your loyalty to Marcus. He bought you with a golf membership and a leased luxury car. You gave him power of attorney over your entire retirement fund. You let him gamble away your future, And you traded your own daughter for a cheap con man. I glanced at Marcus, who was sweating through his suit and staring at his shoes. Leo isn't some poor academic, Marcus, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. His firm is the primary creditor that owns your entire investment fund. They hold all your toxic debt, and they own the bank that's foreclosing on your house. My husband's company finalized the acquisition of that bank this morning. Your empire didn't just fall. We simply decided to stop holding it up. The massive event hall went completely silent. The Ashworth family name was built on a flawless reputation, and I had just detonated it. They stood there in the ruins, exposed for everyone to see. My father, Richard, stared at me, his eyes pleading for a way out. Ava, please, what are we supposed to do? I looked right through him, a hollow feeling where love used to be. The daughter who would have fixed this for him was long gone. You will leave my launch event now, I said, my voice perfectly steady, and you will figure this out alone. I turned to my husband, Leo. Call security. Get them out of here. If they ever come back, charge them with trespassing. I didn't stick around to watch them go. I walked away, heading toward the product demos with Leo. The huge glass doors of the hall closed behind us, cutting them off. But the fallout from that public takedown was just beginning. The social order of Sterling Hills was about to shift, and my family had nowhere to hide. Leo gave a small, invisible signal. 2 men in dark suits appeared from a hallway, their expressions like stone. Their presence was enough to show that the bridge I just burned was gone for good. My father looked at security, then back to me. The entitlement that brought him here had vanished, leaving only pathetic shock. He always thought being dad was a free pass. He was finally learning, in front of everyone, that it had expired. My mother gripped his arm. "Richard, let's go," she hissed, her voice shaking. The performance was over. My sister, Chloe, wouldn't meet my gaze. She just stared at the floor, looking small and defeated in her designer dress. Her husband, Marcus, stumbled toward the exit, a man completely lost. Leo stood by my side, a calm anchor. He adjusted his tie, already turning back to our guests. That fight was over, but the war had just begun. In a town like Sterling Hills, gossip is currency. The city reeled from my father's public downfall. By Monday, the fraud investigation into Marcus's firm was headline news. This wasn't a small problem, it was a disaster. The result was their immediate and brutal exile from the high society they loved. The country club, a place that values reputation over morality, didn't wait for an indictment. My parents' membership was suspended that afternoon for a vague conduct violation, but the real reason was obvious. The Ashworth family's influence had vanished, and my parents were no longer valuable players. Chloe faced her own harsh reality. The charity board she ran politely asked her to resign, effective immediately. All the society wives who flocked to her fundraisers were suddenly unavailable. Her friendships, built on status, disappeared the second the Ashworth name became toxic. The final blow landed when the bank repossessed Marcus's leased sports car and their massive rental in the suburbs. Chloe, my sister who'd laughed at my small apartment and my workaholic lifestyle, was now stuffing her life into boxes. She and Marcus were forced into a run-down 2-bedroom flat on the other side of town. She was living the paycheck-to-paycheck nightmare she swore she was above. And she was alone, because our parents were sinking in their own financial mess, facing foreclosure with a stack of bank warnings on their counter. The wealth they thought kept them secure was now the weight dragging them under. About 3 weeks after my launch, a thick envelope arrived at my office. Personal was scrawled on the front in my father's handwriting. It was still fancy but shaky, lacking its old self-assurance. I tore it open. Inside was a 3-page letter, a rambling, desperate plea for a bailout. Richard wrote about his supposed sacrifices, using guilt and old memories to manipulate me. He described the coming foreclosure, the public shame, and how it was crushing my mother's spirit. He painted himself and my mother as innocent victims of Marcus' spectacular scam. There was zero apology for trying to destroy my career. Not one word about the years of belittling my work or attempting to sabotage my launch. The letter was just one long, pathetic story meant to guilt me into saving them. He wanted a loan, a huge amount, to stop the foreclosure. He promised to repay every penny, an empty promise from a man who had burned every bridge. I read the whole thing. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, not even the old guilt that haunted me. There was only a deep, quiet emptiness. I left the letter on my desk. I wasn't going to reply and list all his betrayals. He wasn't worth the explanation. We were done. I opened my drawer, taking out a heavy ivory noter card and a fine-tipped pen. I remembered winning a coding award as a kid, and my father calling it a cute little hobby. I remembered them trying to ruin my wedding. I remembered a whole life spent begging for an approval he never intended to give. I put the pen to the paper. I wrote no greeting. I didn't sign my name. I just wrote a single clear sentence. I hope you find the peace you never gave me. I folded the card, slipped it into a plain envelope, and addressed it to their house, the house the bank was about to take. There was no check inside, no offer of help. I walked to the front desk and gave it to my assistant for the afternoon mail. I watched the courier's van pull away and felt a final click deep inside me. The wall was complete. I had cut the very last tie to the Ashworth family. But as I walked back to my office to work on a new project, my phone lit up. It was a text from Ben, our attorney. He was finishing the audit of Marcus's collapsed company when he found it a secret account, buried off the books, stuffed with cash Marcus siphoned off before declaring bankruptcy. The text was short, but it was a bombshell. Marcus wasn't just a failure. He was a federal criminal, and he'd listed my parents as the main guarantors on that fraudulent account. Their financial ruin was now officially a crime scene. The next Thursday, a strange bit of frost covered Sterling Hills, perfectly matching the cold reality hitting my parents. The bank finalised the foreclosure. They were given a hard deadline to get out. Richard Ashworth, a man who built his identity on his address and social club, was now facing the humiliating truth of being poor. The fridge was nearly bare. My mother spent the morning crying as she polished silver they had to sell. Their luxury sedan was gone, repossessed during the night. My father needed groceries, but his accounts were frozen, tied up in the fraud investigation. He was at his big desks, digging through junk mail, hoping for a stray check or a coupon. In the back of a drawer, under a pile of past due notices, he found a sealed envelope. He pulled it out. It was postmarked 2 months ago, addressed to him in my handwriting. He tore it open, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was the check I'd sent from my office, repaying the smug $500 loan he'd given me years before. Richard just stared at it. For a man who once expensed $1,000 lunches, $500 was pocket change. But today it was food for a week, Gast's money to go plead with a bank manager, and a brief shield from the shame of being broke. He didn't question the morality of taking money from the daughter he tried to ruin. He ignored the note I'd written in the memo line, paid in full. All his pride had been worn down to pure, raw need. He grabbed his keys, got into their old sedan, the one car they still owned, and drove to the bank. The lobby was almost deserted. He felt eyes on him, certain everyone knew his life was in ruins. When a teller became free, Richard walked to the counter and slid the check across the polished granite. "I need to cash this," he said, his voice a faint echo of its former command. The teller, a young man with a Fullerton smile, picked it up. He glanced at the account, then started typing on his keyboard. Richard watched the screen, holding his breath, already planning his grocery list. The teller stopped. He frowned, typed again. He looked down at the check, then back at his screen. "Mr. Ashworth, I am so sorry," the teller said, his voice quiet and cautious. "I can't cash this check for you." A cold wave of dread washed over my father. "What? Why not? Is the account empty?" "I know for a fact my daughter runs a very successful business." "Oh, the money is definitely there, sir," the teller confirmed. "But the account holder issued a stop payment on this specific check." "A stop payment?" Richard repeated, his voice cracking. "When did she do that?" The teller consulted his notes. The order was processed at 9:15 a.m. on August 10th. August 10th. The date hit him like a punch. That was my wedding day. The exact moment my mother texted to say they were siding with my sister. I hadn't forgotten the check. I'd cancelled it with cold, calculated precision, ensuring that financial link was severed forever before I walked down that aisle. Richard stood at the counter, the devastating truth of his decisions finally crashing down on him. He had traded my loyalty for Marcus's empty promises, and now all he had was a useless slip of paper. He took the worthless check, his hands shaking, and walked out into the cold Seattle rain with absolutely nothing. While my father faced an empty account, Marcus was facing total public ruin. The bankruptcy had taken every asset, his tech bro status, and any shred of dignity he had left. To pay off a sliver of his huge debts and sidestep a deeper federal investigation into the fraud I'd uncovered, the court ordered Marcus to find immediate, steady employment. A huge chunk of his income would be garnished and sent straight to his creditors. But Marcus's biggest obstacle was his own name. The Seattle tech world is small and gossipy. Everyone knew about his epic failure and his dishonest business dealings. No real company would hire a guy known for nearly bankrupting his own in-laws. He applied for developer jobs, consulting roles, anything. He heard nothing but silence. As the court's deadline loomed, Marcus was forced to take a low-wage job through a temp agency. He was desperate for a paycheck, no matter how humiliating the work. So on a cold, miserable Tuesday, Marcus showed up at a massive logistics warehouse in the industrial part of Tacoma. He wasn't wearing a fancy hoodie anymore. He had on a bright yellow safety vest, beat-up work boots, and a generic cap. They made him a package scanner, a mind-numbing, minimum-wage job where he stood for 8 hours, pointing a device at barcodes to route boxes onto the right conveyor belt. He grabbed his scanner and walked out onto the freezing warehouse floor, his pride completely crushed by the manual labor he always made fun of. A few hours into his shift, his soft hands already chafed inside his cheap gloves, he saw a line of black cars pull up to the main office. Marcus knew those cars. They were the same kind that showed up at the hotel on my wedding day. The lead car stopped at the executive entrance. The driver's door opened and Liam stepped out, wearing a perfectly fitted navy overcoat, looking every bit the powerhouse architect he was. A few of his associates followed, carrying large rolls of blueprints. Marcus just froze, his scanner dropping and clattering on the concrete floor. He had been so desperate he never even checked who owned the warehouse. This enormous distribution center, the newest and biggest in the entire state, was a signature project for Summit Architecture. Liam, the man Marcus had written off as some glorified artist, wasn't just my husband. Liam was the lead architect on this entire facility. His firm was signing Marcus's tiny paycheck. For all intents and purposes, Liam was his boss. He wasn't there to gloat. He was just moving across the construction site with an easy confidence, checking on his firm's project. As Liam passed the supply depot, his eyes quickly scanned the area. He saw Marcus in a worn-out safety vest, looking small and defeated. Liam didn't even slow his pace. He didn't smirk or offer a single cutting remark. He just gave Marcus a brief, empty nod, the kind a president gives a groundskeeper he passes on the lawn, and continued on his way. That absolute indifference was 1,000 times more cutting than any insult. Marcus just stood there on the concrete, watching the man he once belittled control the entire world he had lost. Karma had been brutal, quick, and perfectly fair. The Miller family and Marcus were lost in the disaster they had engineered, while Liam and I were beginning our new life. But healing from a toxic family is more than just watching them fall apart. The real work is learning to inhabit the quiet space they once filled and building boundaries so strong they can never get in to hurt you again. 6 months flew by, and the constant grey Seattle rain finally surrendered to the bright green of spring. I was standing on a gorgeous 10-acre plot of land we found on Bainbridge Island. The property rolled down to the shore, giving us a perfect clear view of the city skyline across the water. This was the farmhouse Mason and I had bought. It was our haven, a life we were building from scratch, miles away from the city's superficial glamour. The soil felt alive beneath my boots, smelling of rain and pine. In front of me were rows of garden beds, their first tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil. The air was crisp, clean, and felt honest. I walked between the beds, my hands hovering over the dirt. These weren't delicate, ornamental flowers. They were seeds planted deep, intended to survive any storm and grow strong. And in a way, so was I. I came to the edge of the garden where an old stone wall marked our property line. I placed my hands on the cool stone, looking back at the sparkling skyline, and a deep quiet settled into my soul. The non-stop buzzing of my phone was finally gone. That constant tension of waiting for the next family emergency had finally been severed. In the 6 months since I sent my parents that last, formal goodbye email, the silence from them had been absolute. I still heard gossip through friends in the city, but it felt like news about strangers. The bank officially foreclosed on their penthouse back in March. My parents had to rent a tiny condo miles away from the elite social circles they used to command. My father, having burned all his bridges, swallowed his pride and got a junior sales position at a luxury car dealership, just for the income and insurance. Their marriage, which was held together by charity events and social status, shattered under the weight of having no money. The divorce was fast, vicious, and embarrassingly public. My father's perfect reputation was a fantasy, and now he was desperately trying to save what little face he had left. His spectacular failure was a constant source of city gossip. I was busy eating, sleeping, and focusing all my energy on our baby, creating a life that was completely separate from their world. I once thought that setting a boundary meant you had to build a fortress, a defensive wall designed to lock yourself away so that no one could ever get to you. I was completely wrong. Standing there in my sunlit kitchen, I finally realized a boundary is not a wall, it is a gate. And for the first time in my 30 years, I was the one holding the only key. I could choose to open it for people who brought kindness, support, and honesty into my life. And I could bolt it shut against anyone who only wanted to drain my energy to satisfy their own ego. My family was locked out. They would never get to see our son take his first wobbly steps on this land. They would never eat at the table Mason and I restored. They would never experience the peace of this place because they had proven, time and again, that they had no respect for it. The sound of heels clicking on the marble floor pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Ms. Hayes, my lawyer, walking toward me. She was carrying a single thin file, and her whole presence just radiated a calm, solid confidence. Miss Hayes was a killer whale in a pantsuit. She sat down across from me. She didn't even open her file. She just looked at the spreadsheets I printed out, absorbing the scale of the financial fraud I had uncovered in my father's business. "This is remarkable work, Chloe," Miss Hayes said, her voice steady and full of genuine respect. "This evidence is my independence, not a settlement plea. The Vances are terrified. It wasn't revenge, just truth." My lawyer got the double meaning immediately. She snapped her briefcase shut, the sound like a gavel of victory. "Keep building, Chloe," she told me. "I'll call on Monday when they officially surrender." She left, a quiet warrior in a loud city. I just tilted my face up toward the sun. Mason's was waiting by the park entrance holding 2 fresh juices. He was in his usual work shirt, smelling like dirt and sunshine, a man completely removed from the corporate games I'd just left behind. He simply handed me the drink. It was cool, real, and exactly what my soul needed. He didn't ask about the lawyers. He just put an arm around my shoulders with that solid, silent strength that had held me together through everything. I leaned into him, closed my eyes, and let the sun warm my face. I wasn't the cheated-on wife anymore. I wasn't the woman waiting by the phone for a husband who was out with his new girlfriend. I was Chloe, an architect, building my own future from the ground up. And next to me was my husband, who knew my real worth long before my old, curated life shattered. People always say that time heals everything. It's a nice sentiment, but it's usually said by people who haven't known true betrayal. Healing isn't about time. It's about realizing you don't need the person who broke you. You don't need their validation, their fake apologies, or their permission to be happy. You have to stop setting yourself on fire just to keep their world warm. If you are listening right now, and you're in a relationship that makes you feel small and unseen, if you have spent years shrinking yourself so that someone else could feel big, then listen closely. You are not required to tolerate mistreatment just because they have decided to call it love. You have every single right to stand up, walk out, and build your own damn world. It's just going to be terrifying. That first silence will feel like a storm, but I swear to you, the calm on the other side is worth fighting every battle to get there. Have you ever had to finally lock the door on a toxic relationship for good? Did you ever stop waiting for an apology you realized was never going to come? Tell me your story in the comments. I read as many as I can because your story of getting through it matters. You are not alone in this, and your own peace is the ultimate prize. Be good to yourself. We tend to plant our idea of a person in the garden of our own hopes. We water them, we tend to them, and then we act shocked when the relationship has no real roots. Chloe and Alex's story isn't just about a wealthy man cheating. It is a story about modern relationships and the quiet, toxic ways we abandon the very people we promise to protect. When a partnership becomes more about assets and public appearances, love is no longer a connection. It becomes a transaction. We forget our job isn't to create a perfect spouse, but to be a faithful partner. In the rush to maintain a perfect public life, many people fall into the trophy wife trap. We saw it with Alex. He put Chloe on display like a painting in his gallery. He paid for her lifestyle and managed her image, but he completely ignored her soul. But curating a perfect life until you lose touch with reality is not a sign of strength. It is a fatal character flaw. By closing himself off from any real connection and propping up his ego with money and affairs, Alex became fragile and empty. He handled his life by throwing money at every problem, with no real values to guide him. All the while, the emotionally neglected partner, Chloe, was forced into the background of her own life story. Every single person in a partnership deserves to have a voice. And that voice should never be based on how well you play a role for the cameras. We think of violence as something that leaves physical bruises, but emotional abuse carves scars that can last a lifetime. Alex waged a quiet war on her spirit. He saw his wife not as a partner, but as an accessory for his own social climbing. He chose the cheap thrill of an affair over the health of his pregnant wife and their unborn child. When a man calls his partner too sensitive for being devastated by his lies, he is saying her feelings are an inconvenience to his own narrative. A real partnership demands emotional honesty and the courage to actually listen, not just wait for your turn to talk. When someone decides to be absent during the biggest moments of your life together, they are not just missing a celebration. They are shattering a trust that may never be put back together, leaving a scar that never fully disappears. If you've ever felt completely alone in your own home, or had to be your own hero because the person who was supposed to be there for you vanished, you are not alone. Hit subscribe and join our community. We share these stories because telling your own truth is the only victory that matters. Here's the difference between a beautiful bouquet and a garden with deep roots. Our world worships the bouquet, the fast money, the perfect Instagram life, the gorgeous young designer on a rich architect's arm. My husband's affair was exactly that, a cut flower living on the thrill of the secret and the light stolen from our broken home. But no matter how expensive the arrangement, it starts dying the second it's cut. I, on the other hand, was the garden he forgot to water. I was overlooked, left to grow in the shadows, and forced to face every problem alone. But in that quiet, I found my strength. I learned new skills, got tougher, and developed a will of pure steel. So when the scandal of his financial ruin finally hit, the beautiful illusion shattered overnight. But my roots, they held firm, and they kept growing. A parent's real job is to protect those roots. They say a father should clear a path for his children, not become the roadblock himself, and if he won't, he has no right to stand in their way. Parents are supposed to be guides, not the first monsters their kids have to fight, or the ones who take credit for their success. As children grow up, that entire dynamic has to change. It means teaching them about healthy boundaries, which is not about building walls out of anger. I learned that a boundary isn't a wall to keep the world out. It's a locked gate, and you hold the only key. Respect is the foundation of any adult connection. It has to be earned with integrity, not just demanded because you share a last name like Sterling. We need to teach our kids to build their lives on character and competence, not on schemes and deception. When we show them how to protect their own peace, we give them the only armor they'll ever truly need in a world trying to tear them down. The silence in a house after a family breaks apart is a heavy thing. Betraying your own child's trust creates a fracture that can last forever. The Sterling family found out too that forgiveness is not something you can demand. It requires actual remorse and an honest look at the damage done, not just a desperate plea for silence when the whole story is about to break. Love has to be for who a person actually is, long before the walls they build become too high to climb. So as we sit with our own families, we should ask ourselves what kind of garden we are actually growing. Are we tending to roots that can survive a hurricane, or just arranging cut flowers, hoping for one more perfect day? Look at the people around you. Think about your actions and what they leave behind. Because sooner or later, the storm comes for every single one of us, and the only thing left standing is what you truly built to last.